Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right?
Welcome to Plain Talk, where we are going to be, the topic of public input is a hot one right now, because in some ways, obviously, this is something we want to preserve. We live in a participatory form of government, and of course, participation is public input. But also the rise of social media has, I think, given us all a good taste of what it means to have too much input. Like maybe there's people we don't need to hear so much from. In that context, the North Dakota legislature has passed new legislation. It was Senate Bill 2180. Senator Paulson from Minot was the prime sponsor on it. Representative Lauser, another Minot lawmaker, was prime sponsor in the House. And what the bill does is essentially says, and I'm going to quote now some from the bill, every regular meeting of a governing body of a city, county, township, school district, park district, water resource district must include an opportunity for an individual to provide public comment. It goes on to say an individual providing comment in the meeting shall provide to the governing body in writing the individual's name and address, that information being an exempt record so that Snoopy reporters can't get a hold of their hands on it. And then also, essentially, they are allowed to also limit participation. They can limit the time limits on it, such as time per speaker, or put a total amount of time for the public comment period, or both. They can, essentially say that the comment has to be tied to an agenda topic, something that the school board or the city or what have you has actually been talking about it. And there's also, they're allowed to say if you're being abusive or defamatory or harassing, that they can restrict that. Anyway, this law went into effect on August 1st. And so our governing bodies around the state are having to deal with it. I wanted to have, because one place that has become kind of a flashpoint, not just in North Dakota, but really across the nation, I would say probably even more so across the nation than in North Dakota, is our school boards. We've had fights over books and fights over, LGBTQ issues. And so in that context, our school boards are having to deal with that. Amy DeCook is the executive director of the North Dakota School Boards Association, and she's our guest today to discuss this. Amy, how are you?
Good, Chad and Rob. Good to see you guys, and thanks for having me.
I wanted to call this the Parks and Rec bill, because the minute I heard about it, it made me think of the show where they had a running gag where Pawnee, the city in the show, would hold public hearings or committee hearings or whatever. And the people that would get up were just completely out to lunch. Like they didn't know what they were talking about. They're promoting conspiracy theories. They're completely off topic. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of times, and this is just me being cynical, a lot of times when I watch a lot of public meetings and I see the public comment section, it is shocking to me how true that show was. I mean, obviously it's exaggerated and everything for humorous effect, but there's a lot of instances where people get up and they're just not offering a lot of value. Do you think this law was necessary? I guess, boy, I really set you up with that. But I mean, do you think this law was necessary? Did this solve a problem that we had? Because I didn't really perceive that we had a problem.
That's a great question, Rob. I'm glad you started off that. I think it's really important to note that, yes, we have a new bill, a new legislation that was passed effective August 1st. But the reality is that a large majority of our local school boards have been providing this opportunity to their community at the regular meetings for several years, some for more than a decade or, so this is nothing, this really isn't a new adjustment. I think, again, I think it's kind of pushing back on this perception that the public is not given an opportunity, for their voices to be heard. I'm sure there are some isolated examples where, individuals didn't feel like they had their opportunity to have their voices heard. But again, a large majority of our local school boards were already providing this opportunity. What this bill does do that I think is positive is set some kind of guardrails for our local boards, our local school boards, and cities and counties and whatnot, to make sure that they can properly manage public comment. So again, this isn't anything new, but it does set, I think, some good guardrails, which I think in the environment we find ourselves today is necessary.
Amy, what does properly manage mean? I mean, obviously it allows for limiting the time. It can't just be we can't have public comment just filibuster a meeting and not allow a school board to get things done. I mean, how do you determine that? And how are school board members feeling about having to make that decision to determine when enough is enough?
Yeah, well, again, that's a good point. I would say that the guardrails that I'm talking about are really just to balance the importance of and the desire to get public input, because at the end of the day, it's really important for our public schools to have the support of their local communities, and across the state. It's important, but it's also important that they be able to conduct business in an orderly fashion. And so having some of those guardrails available to them. So for example, like you mentioned, being able to set time limits for individual commenters as well as the entire comment period, making comments relevant to district matters, and also kind of limiting it to items that are on the board agenda. And then being able to also kind of control decorum in the board meetings. That's another aspect of this. In terms of how boards are feeling, I think, again, this is not anything new. We here at the NDSBA provide training and support for our board presidents that are presiding over local meetings to make sure that they understand kind of, what their responsibilities are to control decorum, to make sure that they can continue to conduct business, move things along, but also seek that public input that, again, now more than ever, our public schools in particular, really need the support of the public and the communities that they serve, to continue to thrive. And so it really is a balancing act. And I think our school boards are ready and willing to, continue to kind of navigate through these things as they come up.
One of the things this bill often gets talked about from the perspective that it's mandating the meeting. So it's opening things up. And I think, as we discussed, I think most places in our state probably, and I mean, there's so many when we're talking about all the different, maybe some are doing a better job than others. In my experience, most of the time, if people had something to say and they wanted to get up and say something, they got an opportunity to. What I actually like about this bill is that it puts in law, I think, some guidelines that weren't there before that we're really struggling with. And I guess the anecdote that comes to my mind, because we had him here on the show, about a year ago now, was the mayor of Dickinson, and they were really struggling. They had a person or a small group of people who were coming to meetings and just turning the public comment period into open mic night. And they're saying some really hateful, really ugly things that just weren't even really even relevant. I mean, even to the point, if you could accept that saying racist, ugly, anti-Semitic things, even if it was related to an agenda topic, wouldn't be okay. But they weren't even related to an agenda topic. And I mean, I would argue that it even steamrolled to the point where Dickinson ended up holding a recall election, and then nobody ran in the recall election. So, I mean, it's just an absolute mess. And I think a lot of it had its roots in, their comment section where people were getting up and talking. And I think the city was really struggling with wanting to allow the comment to happen, but how do they narrow it? And now I think this law provides some guidelines. Like, well, you could set a maximum amount of time that everybody could talk, or you could set a person speaker. And if somebody gets up and they're saying abusive or harassing things, it's right in the law now where you can get rid of them. Like, you can say, nope, that's it. You can get the hook out and pull them down off stage. So I guess I'm looking at this. This gives local school boards, cities, some powers that they didn't have before.
Well, I agree with you, Rob. I actually, they've always had the ability to, kind of provide these guardrails. I think with what the
But was
law
it in law?
provides,
Was it in state law though?
it wasn't in state law, but they still have the ability to control, decorum at meetings. So,
But
but this,
essentially it would be, because that's a little tough in the moment where they have a problem person coming up who's being disruptive. And then all of a sudden the mayor makes a motion where let's pass a new rule. Well, that puts the mayor in a bad spot because now it's like, oh, he just doesn't want to take the heat or whatever. It's like the legislature's taking the heat off the locals saying, oh no, this is now the law for everybody. This is it.
yeah, I would agree with that, Rob. I should mention, that a lot of, I've said our local school boards have been providing this opportunity. Most of our school boards have policies in place that outline public, expectations for public participation. And this new law requires them to now adopt a policy. But again, almost all of our local school boards had some sort of policy in place that set those guardrails. What this law does is it does provide kind of consistency and throughout the state, and does kind of provide some cover for our local school boards to have this in state law. Our organization during the legislative session worked with Senator Paulson to put some, because originally it didn't have some of these guardrails in place, and of course our members found that really important that we try to get some of that in, so that yes, we understand.
I think the original bill was just a mandate for open mic night at every meeting.
That's a fair assessment, I would say. But again, we were able to get some of these guardrails in place that I think strikes that appropriate balance between the community being able to provide appropriate input, but also continuing to be able to conduct business in an orderly fashion.
So removing ourselves a little bit from this bill, I think all three of us agree that public comments during public meetings makes a lot of sense. But one of the things we've talked about on the show before is nobody's showing up at the local school board meeting to say attaboy. Nobody's showing up at the local school board meeting to say how things are going well, because people don't have time to sit through a 2-hour school board meeting. It's the same people, whatever. So it's great to have public comment period, but are the school board members really getting a good feel for how the community feels about things with this sort of process? And is there another way for school boards to maybe solicit feedback where the school boards are being proactive rather than just waiting for whoever to show up? Because again, I think Bismarck Public Schools is doing a great job. I'm not going to their meetings to tell them so.
Yeah, Chad, I would agree with you. I do think, it kind of gets back to what Rob was asking before. Was this really solving a problem? I don't think so, because again, most of our school boards have little to no, public attendance at their regular meetings. It's really only when you have, maybe a bond referendum that's being discussed, or maybe there was an incident at the school involving a student or something, and that kind of gets the community riled up. It's really kind of those, there's something that's precipitating, the public showing up at the meeting rather than it being a regular practice. And so I think that's where, when we hear this kind of dialogue that the public doesn't feel heard, it's like, well, you can come to the meetings, and let us know, or contact your local elected officials. You put them in place, they're willing to take your call. But yeah, I think a good point is it the right way? I think it is a method to get, a kind of check the pulse of the community. It's a method, but I don't think it should be the only method. And I think our public schools do a good job of trying to keep parents, the community, informed in various ways. I just think the world we live in now, we're all just so inundated with information all of the time. And so it's so much more difficult to communicate because, we're competing with so many other, so many other voices. And I think it's harder for people to pay attention to some of these things. And so it's a real challenge. I think our districts do a really good job of trying different ways of doing it, inviting people to meetings, holding town hall type forums when issues are coming up to purposely solicit that public input, and that works really well in a lot of ways. But I think we need to continue to try to find new ways of getting people's attention, getting them engaged. I think public schools still struggle with getting folks to pay attention. And it's really only when, there's kind of a hot button issue where I think they start seeing more activity at their board meetings where people are, wanting to give that input. So yeah, it's a challenge, I think. I don't pretend to have the solutions. I think we offer resources to our schools to try to find different ways, encouraging them to communicate in various ways so that, people can receive information in different ways with the hope that, we're continuing to keep folks informed in a way that's productive.
One of the things when I'm trying to sort of analyze somebody's intent, I look at what they do when they're not required to do it. And I think one of the things that really has shown North Dakotas and all the various political subdivisions that we're talking about here, cities, counties, schools, etc., really shows their commitment to wanting people to engage, wanting people to participate, is how many of them started streaming their meetings in various ways on Facebook or YouTube or what have you, long before there was any requirement. There's still not a requirement that they stream their meetings, and yet most of them do. I mean, it's certainly in the larger communities, most of them do it. It's free. It doesn't really cost. You don't really need a lot of elaborate equipment to do it. And they made that choice to do it. So, I mean, if sometimes I think the accusation or what motivates, maybe it's like, well, we got to make them take public comment, is this perception that they don't want that participation. And I just don't think that's accurate. I think what they don't want is disruptive participation, which I guess brings me to my question. If we roll back the clock a few years ago to the pandemic era, things were getting pretty wild. And there's a lot of people, I think the pandemic kind of drove everybody a little crazy. Maybe present company included. But
is that a shot at Amy and I, or is that
probably just at you, Chad?
I was trying to take a shot at myself. You guys may have caught a stray there.
Okay.
I guess I wanted to ask you, do you feel like things are calming down? It feels to me, I guess my perception is that things have calmed down a little bit, but maybe that's wrong. Do you feel like things have maybe settled down a little bit where we're getting back to a more, not that everybody's agreeing now, but back to a more temperate, constructive sort of debate?
I would say yes, things have definitely calmed down since the pandemic. We had, a lot of varying opinions, not just between the board and the public or the school and the public, but also within a board and within a school, so it was a very interesting time to navigate through. Obviously it was unprecedented for most of us, right? We'll always remember, pre and post pandemic and how things have changed, but things have definitely calmed down from that end. I think what's different now is schools still feel that kind of pushback, but it's happening in ways that it's hard for schools to respond. So for example, they're seeing more folks, kind of sounding off on social media rather than maybe coming to the school board meeting and engaging in kind of a constructive feedback. And so that makes it really difficult for school boards to respond or schools to respond when it's happening out there, but it's really not in a way that they can respond constructively to. So I would say that's one point. And also I think another thing to keep in mind that I think is kind of feeding this narrative that the public isn't being heard is this kind of this anti-public education rhetoric, and I know, Chad's mentioned this on your previous episodes before, that seems to start questioning the value of our public schools and public education. It's kind of fostering some distrust in our educators and our public schools and on our school boards. And so I think this rhetoric is impacting how the public is participating in local governance. And it is showing up at our school board meetings. It does influence kind of how school boards are conducting their meetings. When they are anticipating, criticism, I think they're a little bit more nervous about how that will go at school board meetings. And so, the new law, I think, does kind of provide a little bit more of a framework for them to handle some of these things. We've, as an organization, stepped up our resources in trying to help guide boards through that. Oftentimes I am telling boards, we shouldn't be nervous to receive the criticism. I think sometimes if we try to push back on it, rather than just receiving it and moving forward, oftentimes things can, I think when we're resistant to it, it can really amp up the rhetoric that, school boards aren't willing to hear public voice. So just being willing to receive it. And I think our school boards are good at that. They're starting to realize, okay, we're kind of in this new world where folks really want to express their opinions. I think social media kind of fosters this idea that our opinions we kind of have this more self-importance on our opinions, right?
Yeah.
And we want to be heard more. And
It's
we're
given a lot of people the
definitely-
impression that the public should hear their opinions when maybe we shouldn't.
And I think that's just the reality of where we're living in now. And so school boards are definitely feeling that effect. And so we've had to change, especially since, post-pandemic, we've had to kind of change how we receive and how we respond to public comment and public input on the business of public schools.
Amy, shifting gears slightly, I don't want to get into if the legislature should have passed a cell phone ban or if they shouldn't have passed a cell phone ban. I'm sure there's varying opinions on this. I know there are between Rob and I. But how's the implementation going from the school board's perspective? Obviously, your members aren't the ones that are dealing with it day in, day out, but they put together the policies. They're the ones that are in charge of making sure they're following state law. How's it going? What are you hearing back from members?
We were kind of weren't sure what to expect once the school year started. Surprisingly, we're hearing very little in terms of issues. We might hear an isolated. I think it's where I think the implementation issues might come, and this will continue to play itself out. But there's important exceptions in the law for students, who are on an IEP or a 504 plan that really need, that have a medical need or a need for access to certain devices. I think that's where, if we're hearing anything, it's navigating through those issues while also still protecting student privacy. And our schools vary so much in terms of their facilities and the size and what their communities expect. And so there's some variation on how they're, implementing and complying with the law, which was built into the law. I mean, it is a bell-to-bell ban, but there is some flexibility. We worked with the governor's office and with the bill's sponsors to put some flexibility into the law in anticipation that, some of these students are going to need some access. I think that's where we're hearing, just trying to navigate through that and put appropriate guardrails in place, as well as to protect the privacy of the students themselves. So we're not outing students, private information just because they have access to devices during school. So that's, I think, where we're hearing, okay, we need to make some shifts in how we handle these things from a day-to-day basis.
Hey, Rob, before you jump in, I have a follow-up to that. So, Amy, am I hearing that potentially we might be seeing students who are developing medical reasons to have a cell phone since cell phones have been banned?
Oh,
is that an issue?
Well, I could jump in and say that my 17-year-old lobbied mom and dad very hard to contrive a medical reason to have her cell phone in school. And we did not.
But are we dealing with that? I mean, is it something that schools are actually
I
dealing with?
kind of wondered that it's going to become like the comfort pets, where all of a sudden I'm on a flight with somebody's flipping Chihuahua because they allegedly have anxiety issues.
And mine not either going to have a cell phone in one hand and a duck in the other hand to get them through the day.
Yeah, something like that.
That's a possibility. I think we're not seeing a flood of those yet. There is some protection in the law about that, about who can provide that permission in terms of a medical provider, who constitutes a medical provider under the law. There might need to be some tightening up of that, or maybe not necessarily a need from our perspective, but I could see that being a place where the law is tinkered with next session. If we start seeing a flood of those kind of accommodation requests, the reality is that's kind of been part of the school environment before the cell phone ban. Schools have had to deal with those kinds of issues from the student perspective as well as employees who are asking for accommodations. And so it's not a new issue. They can be complex because there are very valid reasons for these accommodations in a lot of contexts. But I think there's also the opportunity for abuse. It's not the first time I've heard, Rob, a parent being lobbied for their student to maybe get some sort of exception. But there are guardrails in the law about what is an appropriate exception. It's not, one thing that the governor, I think, said a couple of different times while we were kind of hammering out the details of this legislation during session is that they didn't want the exceptions to blow, a hole in the rule itself, which is, that bell-to-bell ban, not wanting, devices, during instructional time.
Amy, could you see Rob's body language change when we started talking about the cell phone ban? I mean, I want to play poker with this guy.
Yeah, I'm not a subtle person. I was laughing at myself a little bit, though, that I'm such a curmudgeon that on one hand, I think the ban is kind of silly, and I don't think it's going to accomplish anything like its proponents say it will. I think this is old people ranting about Elvis again, play these same moral panics out over and over again. They never accomplish anything. But on the other hand, I'm also the one who's like the people who want to get out from the ban with some phony baloney. Like, I don't believe any of it. Like, whatever. You need your phone. Yeah. I don't believe it for a minute.
One thing I mentioned, Rob, is just to kind of put a context to that, is that I agree with you. I don't think this is going to solve, attendance issues or, our test scores going up. There are a lot of other issues that contribute to, our attendance problems or absenteeism and students struggling. I think there are a lot bigger issues than access to devices that impact those that a student's experience every day, a lot of which, require a lot more than just a piece of legislation to solve. Family life at home, food insecurity, poverty, all of those things that have been around before devices were available in all of our pockets that public schools have continued to have to deal with, serving all schools, or excuse me, all students that come into their doors. And so I think this is one tool to potentially help with some of those bigger issues, but it's certainly not going to be the solution to everything.
We've gone a little bit over, but last question, kind of bringing it back to the original topic where, school board meetings, but really local government meetings in general becoming sort of this flashpoint. And I wonder if you agree, because I've kind of argued in the context of things like the cell phone ban, but really other policies too, where sometimes we try to pass these do-gooder policies and then we put it on the backs of schools in particular to enforce. And I feel like that invites some of the flashpoint. Am I right about that? Do you guys perceive it that way too, or you or your members?
Yeah, I think we've certainly felt that in the past, that, there's a lot of responsibility is put on public schools to address, the multiple problems that our students and our families face, these days. And I think when we put expectations like this in place, and our public schools deal with are great. They're doing very amazing things every day, but they deal with a lot of challenges every day that are a lot of which are never going to go away. We can help improve, but I don't think they're ever going to go away. And so there's always, I think, going to be something to point out that we can improve, right? We're not perfect, never claim to be perfect, but we are going to consistently have challenges. And I think sometimes putting these expectations in place that, this is going to solve these problems is only setting us up for criticism, because it's not, some of these problems are just not easy to solve. And a piece of legislation isn't probably going to be the solution. So yeah, I agree with you.
Amy DeCook, Executive Director of the North Dakota School Boards Association. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, Plain Talk listeners, have something to say? Call or text Plain Talk with your questions, comments, or headlines you want us to cover.
Just dial 701-587-3141. Leave us your message or shoot us a text with your name and location, and you could be featured on an upcoming show.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I am in Jamestown.
Hey, Rob and Chad. My name's Tony. I live in Grand Forks.
That's 701-587-3141.
Call us, text us, vent, praise.
We want you in the conversation. Thanks for being part of the show.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back. Just finished up with Amy DeCook from the North Dakota School Board Association. A good conversation. I do think things are calming down a little bit post-pandemic. And I do like this bill. As the bill was originally written, I thought it was motivated by a problem that doesn't actually exist. Motivated by hostility in this context that was unnecessary. But I think it, as often happens, was amended into a pretty good piece of legislation. And the thing I do like is that I think this helps a situation with Dickinson where they want to have open meetings, but they feel like it has to be so open, the comment section just becomes a sewer. Right. And, this allows them, like, now it's in law. They don't have to look self-serving about making up their own policies. It's state law. It has to be related to an agenda item. You can only speak for 5 or 10 minutes or whatever time limit. And if you start abusing people, you're out.
Yeah, I mean, it's common sense, right? I mean, Public meetings and people's time.
There's probably a reason why we went from statehood to now without needing some of this.
Right. But yeah. I think Amy's point where she said it's generally when there's a specific issue that's sort of blowing up. I think that's generally the case. During COVID and after COVID, it seemed like just every meeting was the same people. So I do agree with you guys that things have maybe calmed down a little bit. But you said something when we were talking about this subject in a previous show where you talked about, the possibility of somebody not wanting to stand up and give their opinion when it's a legitimate opinion, but it agrees with the crazy people and they don't want to stand up because they don't want to be connected with that.
Or
and I think vice versa too.
Well, like if you just have, like, if you want to stand up at the, like, you go down to the school board meeting because it's like, I'm really tired of, we have different start times on different days of the week. Right. This is actually a real gripe of mine about the Mine Up school system. And the thing is like, I might want to show up at a school board meeting and say, I'd really appreciate it if we could have more uniform start times. And I can say that and make that criticism. We're also thinking that the Minot public school system overall is great. Right. Doing a good job. But this is an area I think we could improve. But I get down there and now there's a bunch of people screaming about, the librarian is trying to turn kids gay or something. And do I feel like I'm going to be hurt? Like do I want to go to the podium in that context and look like another person who's just there to,
or even if they're there, Rob, for the same subject as you, but they stand up and say the school board is a bunch of crooks and that's why they changed the start times or they have staggered start times or whatever. You don't want to be associated with that. And then on the flip side, do you want to stand up and put yourself out there to have this group of people who have a lot of time on their hands to attack you if you're differing with them? It's just, I don't know.
The whole, like, keeping the names and stuff of people or like the private information, everybody knows everybody.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. When I watch like Minot City Council meetings, I know everybody who's talking. I
Right.
mean, that's
Well-
not, it's pretty unusual that somebody comes to the mic that I don't know who they are, right?
And during the COVID time, I mean, like literally it was just first name basis because people were at the same meetings week after week after week.
So I think it's a good bill. I'm glad it passed.
I'm glad it passed. I'm glad it put some guardrails on it. But again, I think that I get frustrated when the legislature tries to legislate something that's either a non-issue or they've had one issue at a local level and then they go, it's sort of like the book ban. You found one book you're uncomfortable with, so you're going to ban all the books in the state.
And call all our educators and librarians groomers and everything else.
Right. Yeah.
I think the original motivation was a problem that didn't exist. I think they amended it into something that did solve a real
That helps. Yeah, that's
I
true.
think this helps Dickinson.
Right. Yep.
So, I do like that. Although I do also think that we should be a little bit more complimentary at times, that our system, our local governments, understanding that there's a lot of them and maybe not all of them are living up to this standard, but for the most part, it's very open. And it's a lot of good-hearted, well-intentioned people who are doing their best, and everyone will make mistakes at times, but because they're human beings. But for the most part, I think, again, I made the point during the interview, I think it's really telling how many government agencies, political subdivisions have chosen to stream their meetings when they didn't have to.
Well, and again, these aren't like really powerful jobs, right? You don't get paid a lot of money. They are true public service, these political subdivision elected officials. And
there is no glamour. There is no glamour to being on the school board.
I once had a former state senator who was also a county commissioner and said a county commission job is way more difficult because when the street isn't plowed on a township road, they know how to call their county commissioner. They never call their state senator.
Right.
That these are the ones that are actually getting the work done.
I understand that. I get that. And I should point out, earlier this week, we had the CEO of Applied Digital on, and we were talking about a public meeting in Harwood. If you read the reports, the Cass County Sheriff's Department had to remove people from that meeting because they were being so disruptive. Now, I suppose those people, and I don't know, maybe they are, but the pattern tends to be when someone goes and misbehaves at a meeting like that and they get kicked out, now they're martyrs. It's because the man is stifling speech or whatever. How about you just be a grown-up when you show up?
And that's just it. The person stifling speech is the person who's yelling and screaming and disrupting the meeting, right? I mean, other people are there to speak as well. They're just not there to hear your buffoonery.
Well, those meetings belong to all of us, not just the people who are upset, not just the people who are angry. And they're doing everybody's business. And other people's ability to participate or whatever shouldn't be derailed because other people showed up and decided to be disruptive or abusive.
Rob, we live in a society, for God's sakes. Yeah. Sometimes you have to listen to people who disagree with you.
Speaking of that, I wrote about my print column this morning was about Democrats and sort of it was one of those weird columns. I had to write it before the holiday. Like it didn't get published for today, but it was for print. And so the deadline got moved ahead. Normally I would write that on Monday. I ended up writing it on Friday, which feels like a long time ago. So sometimes you'll see where I get very generic with a topic. That's what's going on. Because it's hard to write that far ahead. I don't know what's going to be topical. But that one,
it's like recording this podcast 2 days in advance. We don't know what's going to happen between today and Friday.
This is very true. This is very true. But I wrote the column because I just feel like there's got to be a shift. And I'm saying this from the perspective, I don't know that there's many people in North Dakota who have been as publicly, vociferously, consistently critical of Donald Trump as I have been. I think he's terrible for this country. I'm not backing off any of that. There comes a point, though, where the people who are supporting him are not being persuaded by some of the things Democrats are saying about him. They're not persuaded that he's a threat to democracy. They're just not. And I think that's sad, and I think it should be. But the thesis of it is sometimes I feel like, and I'm saying this perspective, not a Democrat, not that interested in Democrats winning. I would like to see Republicans be a little more scared and knock off some of their more egregious behavior. But I feel like Democrats are talking about things that Democrats care about and not that the people care about. Not that Democrats aren't people, but there's a little too much of a hothouse over there right now. Does that make sense?
No, I agree with you 100%. I also think you might be the worst messenger in the world to get Democrats to listen to you. Maybe not the worst messenger in the world.
Yeah. No, I get it.
But I think it's really important that people listen to this. I mean, after I read that column, as the executive director of the Democratic Party back in the day, and it's a terribly difficult job. It's a hard job. Chairman of the Democratic Party or any party is terribly difficult. But I do get concerned, and not just about North Dakota Dems, but national Dems as well, when the message is we hate Trump and Trump's terrible. And again, I think the cake is baked. I mean, maybe there's a couple percentages that will swing back and forth. The Epstein stuff, I think the Epstein stuff is horrendous. I think everything should come out, whatever. But guess who's not being persuaded by that? Swing voters. Swing voters aren't paying attention to this. Threats to democracy. Locally, so much focus on the Ethics Commission. I think the normal swing voter in North Dakota and in this country, the things they're concerned about is my health insurance and how expensive it's going to be. There's a great opportunity for Democrats to talk about that right now.
There's some Republicans talking about that right now, too.
Right. Public schools and how are my schools funded? Are they functioning in the way they want to? Am I getting a living wage? And are the tariffs making my stuff cost more money? Right? Those are the things are the tariffs making it more difficult for a farmer to stay in their land? Like, there's a lot of real issues. We got to talk about things that people care about. Not what you think they should care about, but what they actually care about.
And you have to talk about them in ways like you just used the term living wage. And that has become such a progressive. I don't think it's
bullshit.
I mean, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I think the people hear a term like that and they just well, I know where he's going and I'm just not interested in it.
But a wage that allows somebody to work one job and not have to work 2 or 3 jobs. Hell, childcare fits into that. There are so many things that when I think about what I wake up in the morning and I'm thinking about in terms of my family are not Epstein,
but
not democracy.
Sure. But I think even the way you talk about it, it can't come off as more progressives lecturing us.
Right.
About how it's well, we're really worried about health insurance. Well, we know what we ought to do. We ought to just be Canada. Well, that has not worked for you.
But don't you think part of it is just recognizing it? Isn't that part of it just recognizing that people are concerned that their health insurance is going up?
And I think there's some subtlety there. If you stop short of saying let's be Canada and just say, boy, health insurance prices are outrageous and they keep going up. Healthcare costs, by the way, we keep talking about, and I think that was when we talked about to John Gottfried.
Connect the dots, man. It goes to the healthcare providers.
What's upstream from health insurance? Healthcare costs are going out, and sometimes in ways that don't make any damn sense. That list he shared with us about common medical costs,
right?
Even within North Dakota, the price variance was shocking. What justification is there for a live birth? A traditional live vaginal birth costs 600% more in Fargo than it does in Minot.
Right.
What is the justification for that? That is absurd.
Yep.
But yet that's the world. I think that people could. I don't know. Maybe it's a style thing, but people like Trump style. Style matters a lot. I think people are just tired of being lectured.
But Dems also can't try to be Trump either. Nobody's going to be Trump, right?
Well, Gavin Newsom's trying it.
Yeah. I honestly think we need to, people on the left need to focus on, there's just a story that came out today that Trump's telling House Republicans that there needs to be a rebranding of the Big Beautiful Bill because everybody hates the Big Beautiful Bill. The problem is not the name. The problem is people don't like what's in it or what they think is in it at this point, as Julie Fedorchak would probably push back on me for saying, right? The problem is not the branding. The problem is the policy. Yeah. And so I think Democrats, but we're also just so damn polarized in this country that it's hard to get a message through without, I mean, I talked about health insurance is too expensive. You jump to, you want a Canadian system, right? I mean, I think that's sort of the conservative
Well, I jumped there because that's where
yeah, no, I understand that. Or I say living wage. I want people to be able to work a job and spend time with their family. But you heard something different, right?
I heard let's mandate a minimum wage at some absurdly high level that I don't think is the solution to the problem. I also agree that I don't think, I mean, I look at my purchasing power here in my mid 40s compared to my father at this point in his life. They are very different. He was able to afford a lifestyle that I can't. And It's not my fault. We're about equivalent in terms of our levels of success and career advancement, but yet, you know, it's a different world we're living now.
Yeah, and can Democrats talk about the reason you're being, you're not having a different lifestyles because there's winners and losers, right? The government is the reason why. Like, is there sort of almost a libertarian sort of appeal to folks saying,
I think there could be, but the Democratic brand is just very, very. I mean, not just in North Dakota, national.
No, you're right.
Is on. It's on fire.
And I worry that it is hard to pull it out because one of the issues with the Democrat brand is often the leaders nationally are pretty far left. Well, that's what the vast majority of Democrats want, right? That's who they want. Well, but that's not going to appeal to the people who Democrats need to vote for them. It's very, very difficult.
I don't think, you know, I went to that People's Town Hall event that, you know, we had Trigby Hammer on about it. He put it on, the Democratic MPL put it on. And I don't know that I've ever really articulated very well, because I think it was really important as a signifier for kind of what Democrats are trying to do and what's just not working. You know, I wrote about it. I wrote about the event. I brought it up again in this column we're talking about now. But it was just so interesting because I went in there and it just felt like another lecture. Like it didn't feel new. It didn't feel appealing to me. And I got to think that I'm not ready to start, you know, voting for Democrats all the time. But I got to think that people like me are the gettable people who are just disgusted by Trump and disgusted by a lot of the things that the Republican Party has become. You should be reaching out to me. And I feel like I'm just being lectured to. Like the expectation is I have to be a progressive now, but I'm not a progressive. So how are you going to get me? And it's hard. Or even I wrote a column in response to the shooting in Minnesota. You know, what happens when the monster looks like us?
Yep.
And a really good friend of mine who's very left of center posted it on Facebook. And he said, I got it 99% right, and then proceeded to criticize me because I didn't bring up gun control. And then I was kind of taking it on the chin in the comments because I didn't bring up gun control. And it's like, well, you agreed with me, but now I'm getting lectured because I don't think that gun control is the solution to this. And I don't even think it's a practical political thing to be talking about at this point. When is that in the last 30 years? When has a gun control debate worked out well for Democrats?
Right.
It's just not where the voters are. And at some point, I feel like Democrats have to recognize this. You are beating your heads against a brick wall. Maybe it's time to go around the wall.
So I also think it's interesting, this sort of, I hate the term litmus test, but there seems to be this sort of, if you're not with us 100%, you're the enemy, which doesn't get you very far. I earlier today met with a legislator and talked about the relationship she has with my employer and, you know, issues having to do with public education. I mean, I told her, I said, we don't expect for you to agree with us on everything. That's not the way this works. There's nobody who agrees with us on everything. But on the things that we do agree on, let's work together. And I think that's missing in sort of the, you know, we can't just say, hey, Rob, good column. We have to say, Rob, good column, but here's what you got wrong.
But look at these departures from liberal orthodoxy that you are guilty of. And my answer to that is, well, I'm not a liberal.
Right.
But I am interested in finding ways in which you and I agree.
Yeah.
And working on those things and maybe making some good public policy around those things. I'm very much interested in finding the places where we can agree and just sort of setting aside the intractable debates. Like we're not going to get anywhere on guns. So then what can we agree on? Where can we go?
So on guns, why do you think we were able to pass the assault weapons ban in the 90s, but it's so impossible now? Is it the rise of the NRA sort of stuff, or like, I mean, back then North Dakota's delegation voted for an assault weapons ban. I mean,
Yeah.
like, how's it changed how have the politics of guns changed so much?
I think it's some of it's cultural. I mean, you'll hear me. In fact, the little bit that I commented on that Facebook thread I was referring to, you know, I mean, I grew up in gun culture. Like, we lived in rural Alaska when we were very, very poor, and when we needed food, my dad or one of his brothers would just go shoot a moose. My dad was a cop. He was a soldier. I started shooting guns when I was 5 or 6 years old, obviously alongside my dad. When I was 7, I got a .22 rifle for my birthday. To this day, I have a locker of guns in the back room. But I will tell you that there is a difference between what I grew up in, where guns were not something you flashed around.
They were not a religion. They weren't
a religion. They were a tool. And even I would argue my family has long felt it's an important part of citizenship to be armed and to have this. But beyond that, it's become this. I think because it became a cultural totem. I think the politics, and then it became a way to sort of signal which team you were on.
Yeah.
So very ostentatious. So now we see like my family would have never taken one of these family photos where everybody's holding an AR-15. Right. Now you'll see some hunting pictures of me as a kid, you know, posing with some murdered pop cans or something.
That's different.
Rifle. But this sort of very ostentatious, and I don't like that either. I mean, I would think a lot of these people don't really know gun safety, don't really know, you know, it's really problematic, some of the places we've gone. It even worries me. That being said, I'm yet to be convinced that as a matter of public policy, that a lot of the gun control, the Democrats, what it feels like is you want to punish me for something that a criminal did. That's how I perceive it. I've never committed a crime with my guns. I'm a
but I think the two low-hanging fruits are assault weapons ban, because I'd have to be convinced on why we need assault weapons, and then also like a more stringent background check.
They're all assault weapons. I mean,
yeah. I mean,
I don't want to start.
That's right. But one thing I get frustrated, it's so black and white. It's so, if you want to do anything to better control guns and keep them out of the hands of people, red flag laws, those kind of things.
I'm not necessarily against red flag laws, but I'm against a red flag law that says because
get rid of due process.
PSA put you on a list, we're going to deprive you of your civil rights.
But we can't. My point, Rob, as a society, is we can't even have that conversation, right? That you go up to the legislature, and if you bring up something, and it's, oh, you want to take away all your guns. No, nobody wants to take away your damn guns. I don't want to take away your guns. I have no interest in your guns. But do I want kids to stop getting shot? Yes.
I think some of the other things that happened in the Clinton era, where you look at Waco, you look at like Ruby Ridge, where from the right wing perspective, from the conservative perspective, and I even feel, I mean, there's radicals who feel this way. But I think there's also centrists who look at Waco and see an absolute travesty and a complete overbearing federal government that stormed in. Now, the ironic thing is all that paranoia, some of it, you know, well justified, but all that right-wing paranoia about the federal government has now evaporated, that President Trump is sending the military into cities, I guess using, you know, federal power and violating the Posse Comitatus Act, and everything is okay if you're a Republican sticking it to Democrats, which is more terrifying than anything that we've talked about in this conversation.
Everybody's a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Right? As long as our team is doing it, then it's okay.
Yeah. So, you know, that was really, really frustrating. And, you know, just the cultural thing, I guess last thing we'll talk about, I had a column where I just wrote about my son, you know, and kind of responding to some of the criticisms. My son went to school, and they write a journal, and in their journal, the assignment day was like the second or third day of school, something like that. And in the journal, their assignment was to write about someone you admire. And my son wrote about me. And boy, did that make me feel good. He was writing about how I used to read to him to help him go to sleep at night, and how I'm so nice to him and his friends, and I help him with his math homework, and I taught him how to play baseball and all those things. It really made me feel good. And I was just kind of riffing on that, thinking, that's the feedback that really matters. Like, that's the opinion. We get so wrapped up in what some rando on Facebook thinks about us. Who cares? My son thinks I'm a good person. My wife and my daughters think I'm a good person. What else do I need? World, right? And under that, I got a couple of comments from people. Somebody with an unpronounceable username said, it doesn't matter what any human says. It matters what God and the Bible says about you, and neither one has much good to say about you. Responding to me, it says, Rob represents the typical feminized man who has to go along with popular brainwashing to get married. Men who tell the truth these days will not be getting married and having kids, as women are overwhelmingly deceived into rejecting God's roles for women that women in North Dakota embraced since 1889. And then it was somebody somebody responded to that. Like, normally you think that's just a crazy comment, but somebody responded and said, hey, that's spot on. I totally agree with you. I think you absolutely nailed it here. Oh, by the way, Rob Port doesn't care what the Bible says. Maybe you forgot that about him, but he claims to be an atheist, but maybe you did. And that was the point of your reference to the Holy Scriptures. And I just read that, like, these people exist in the world. Like, I don't think that this is AI. These people exist. They really feel that way. And I think it's the team mentality. Like, they don't perceive me as being on their team anymore. I'm getting that a lot these days because I don't like Trump and everything. So I'm not on their team anymore. So they feel betrayed by me, and now they hate me, and they're not allowed to agree with me on anything. It amuses me how often people who are about to agree with me on something have to preface it with, I don't often agree with Rob Port, or I don't agree with Rob Port, but I think he makes a good point here. Why do you feel like you have to do that?
So I just want to, they don't perceive you to be on their team. Well, I will just say this. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on the podcast, but those guys are assholes. Yeah. The reality is real calm about you caring about your child. There's nothing better than that. That we need more parents who care about their kids. And
I like the thing where he was like, well, men can't get married because the women are rejecting how they were supposed to behave. It's like, okay, I can't get married because I expect women to behave like it's still the 19th century and they can't vote and they can't get a credit card without their husband's permission and things like that. That's no wonder women don't want to be around you.
Yeah, I don't think it's him making the decision not to marry a woman, if we're being honest.
I think you're
right.
But
I also think this idea of teams, like, there are people have very different political perspectives than I do. Often, I mean, even some of the people we talk about on the far right? Or on the far left, for that matter. I can at least say, that dude's a good dad, right? That guy's a good dad. Kelly Armstrong's a good dad. Rob Port's a good dad. I mean, there's a lot of... Drew Wrigley's a good dad, right? I mean, we can all agree on this stuff, that it's okay if I disagree with somebody politically to still recognize, guy's okay. Yeah. Like we shouldn't... Of all your columns, Rob, of all the things that I've thought, I didn't read that column and think one negative thought, which is abnormal for me. Usually when I read your stuff, I'm very angry.
Yeah. I don't think that's true.
No.
I think it's, and I don't like the, I remember way back sort of before the rise, and it's a much different, but believe it or not, when I started blogging, I really think it was sort of the liberal hegemony over like culture and the media, I think was a real problem. And I think there was a reason why conservatives were flocking to like talk radio and then eventually blogs and stuff at the time, is because they weren't feeling welcome. Like, their viewpoint wasn't welcomed. They weren't on the team. So, I mean, this isn't like a modern thing, this team, and it's not exclusive to the right. but now it's metastasized into this idea, because what I never said is at the time it was like, well, we have to have conservative music and we have to have conservative literature and conservative movies. And now we're seeing that now, right? Like sometimes, like Sydney Sweeney is now a conservative celebrity now because of the whole jeans debacle, or so-and-so's, it's like we have to pigeonhole it. Like, are they team red or team blue? And I can only like people on team red, and I can't like people on team blue. And it's not just politicians, it's musicians, it's professional athletes, it's all of them. It's frustrating. I think that's such a stupid thing. We're balkanizing ourselves.
Yep. No, I mean, if we can't agree on being a good parent's an important thing, I think we're pretty ruined as a society. I thought it was a good column, no matter what impronounceable name says on social media.
Yeah.
It is sort of funny, though. You started this out by saying, hey, this column is about the opinion of people on social media. It doesn't matter. This is all that matters. Then we talked about the opinion of two idiots on social media.
It's hard. It's hard to ignore. It's hard to ignore that there's people like that who feel that way in our society. And I hope there's people that love them. And I hope that they have a fulfilling life. And maybe one day, the scales will drop from their eyes and they can realize that just because somebody disagrees with you politically or culturally or in terms of sports teams, that they're not it doesn't mean they're a bad person. We've lost sight. I mean, one of the great things about one of the prices of admission to America is that you're going to see and hear some things you don't like. That's just the way
we live in a society, for God's sakes.
Yeah, that's exactly
act like it.
And that goes left and right. And last thing, not that we are over time, not that I want to get into it, but recently Malcolm Gladwell, who I think is just a very fascinating author. He gave a podcast interview and he was talking about like the trans athletes issue. And he was talking about a panel that he was on where he said he felt afraid to speak out and say, no, I think it's a problem that trans, like formerly male, I don't know how to say it. You know what I mean, though. Like basically trans athletes competing against females. Right. That he felt scared to speak out. Malcolm Gladwell, who's got an enormous audience,
he's got some street cred too.
Right. And he was afraid of speaking out on that because he didn't want to get canceled. And the thing is the position he's articulating is not an unreasonable one. And I think it's one that probably most Americans agree with. It is very problematic to have somebody who was male not that long ago suddenly competing against women and just absolutely dominating them. That's a problem. I think it's not a problem to look at that situation and say, that feels unfair. But he was afraid to express that. That was kind of the society we've been living through. And I guess just to exemplify, it comes from the left and the right. And we've got to stop it.
I don't disagree with that.
All right. We got to wrap this up. Thank you so much for listening. Coming up next week, Pat Traynor, North Dakota Health and Human Services Interim Commissioner. He's going to be on. Remember, you can always leave us a voicemail, send us a text, 701-587-3141. Follow us on all the social media things, TikTok, TikTok too. TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and X. Where Plain Talk ND is our handle on all of them. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again.
Steer up.
That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
We live in a society, for God's sakes.